All right, 8.6 is the law of sines and cosines. Make sure that you have your calculators ready because this is going to be heavy with calculators. The law of sines can be used to find side lengths and angle measures for any triangle. So here's what the law of sines is. The idea is this. You take the sine of an angle and you put it over its opposite side. So sine of A would go over that opposite side, which we're going to call little a. And then sine of B would go over its opposite side, little b. And then sine of C would be over its opposite side, little c. So when you're trying to figure out, when you're solving a triangle, how do you know what to use? You're going to use law of sines if you have angle, angle, side, or angle, side, angle, which basically means if they give you more angles than sides, then you're going to use the law of sines. And so here's how it's going to work. So in this first triangle, what you should notice is you're given two angles, okay? So, and you're only given one side length, that 8. So this would be an example of when you would want to use law of sines because you have more angles than sides. Okay, so we would say, so 78 goes with 8 and 60 goes with x because you put the side that's opposite the angle together. So sine of 60 over its opposite side x would be equal to sine 78 over its opposite side 8. And then we're going to cross multiply to solve. So 8 times the sine of 60 is equal to x times the sine of 78. And we're trying to solve for x. So remember, sine 78 is just a number. So to cancel multiplying, I would divide by sine 78. And before you do this on your calculator, I would make sure I always put that in parentheses on my calculator so that my calculator knows I want all of this to go together as the denominator. And so when you do that on your calculator, we're going to round this to the nearest tenth. X would be 7.1. And make sure you check that on your calculator. Don't just write these notes and move on. You have to be able to do these on your calculator. Okay, the next one. If you notice, 54 and 8 go together. But the issue here on this one is that side x that we're trying to solve doesn't have an angle across from it. But we can find that angle because the three angles in a triangle add to 180. And that angle would be 89. So now we're ready to set up the law of sines. So the sine of 89 over its opposite side x is equal to the sine of 54 over its opposite side 8. And then we're going to cross multiply. So 8 times the sine of 89 is equal to x times the sine of 54. And then again, just like we did before, we're going to divide by that sine of 54 because that's going to cancel. And I have to do that on this side as well. And I'm going to make sure that I put that in parentheses on my calculator. So on my calculator, I'm going to have 8 times sine of 89 divided by parentheses sine of 54. And you should get out 9.9. Okay, these other two examples. So again, I want you to notice they're giving you two angles and one side. So again, 31, its opposite side is given. 14, its angle is not given, but we can find it. And that angle would be 86. And now I can set up the law of sines. So the sine of 86 over its opposite side 14 would be equal to the sine of 31 over its opposite side x. And then we're going to cross multiply to solve. So x times the sine of 86 is equal to 14 times the sine of 31. And then again, I'm going to divide by that sine 86 on both sides. And I'm going to put it in parentheses. And when you do that on your calculator, x will equal 7.2. Okay, and then the last one. So 125 goes with its opposite side x, and then the opposite with 6.8 is r. We don't have that angle, but we can find it, which is 31 degrees. So the sine of 31 over its opposite side, 6.8, is equal to the sine of 125 over its opposite side x. and cross multiply. X times the sine of 31 is equal to 6.8 times the sine of 125. And then we're going to divide by that sine of 31 on both sides, putting it in parentheses. And so X equals 10.8. Okay, so that is law of sines. Again, you're going to use law of sines when the information in the triangle is giving you more info on angles than sides. Use law of sines. Okay, when you can't use law of sines, then law of cosines is what could apply. Law of cosines. So here's how law of cosines works. Whatever side you're trying to find, you have to make sure you're paying attention to sides are across from angles. So little a and big angle A go together. So when you're setting up law of cosines, like if I'm trying to find what A is, then I have to set it up like this. So the law of cosines is I take that A squared. If I'm finding that side right there, then my cosine better have that A as the opposite angle with it. No different than, let's say I'm trying to find B. If I'm trying to find B, then my cosine better have the angle across from that little side B with it. Okay, so the law of cosines is whatever side you're trying to find, you set that equal, then you square your other two sides, add those together, minus 2 times those other two sides multiplied together, times the cosine of the angle across from the side that you set right there. So the angle with your cosine always goes with the side you set across from that equal sign. You're going to use law of cosines if they give you more sides than angles. So side angle side means they've given you two sides, they've given you one angle. You're going to use the law of cosines. Okay, so here's how it works. Whoops. We're going to find x, we're going to round to the nearest tenth. Okay, so they've given us this angle here. Here's the side opposite it. So what I'm going to do, so again, I have two sides given and one angle given. So this is law of cosines. So I'm going to, this is the side opposite the angle. So I start with it. X squared equals. Then my other two sides, I'm going to square those and add them together. Minus 2 times those other two sides. And then the cosine of that angle that they gave us that was opposite the side we're trying to find, that 125. And then you're going to work this out on your calculator. So I always do 15 squared plus 19 squared first, and I write that number down. That's 586. Minus, and then I do this. 2 times 15 times 19 is 570, and then I bring down my cosine 125. And then that's equal to x squared. Okay, and then I would do that on my calculator, but when I do this on my calculator, I make sure to put this in parentheses because I need to subtract off all of this, and that's being multiplied together. So if you do that on your calculator, work it left to right, put in those parentheses there, you would get out 912 point, and I'm going to round to the nearest hundredth, 94, and then square root it. Rounding to the nearest tenth, we get 30.2. Okay, let's look at this next one. On this next one, again, they have given us two sides and one angle. So that means law of cosines. Two sides and one angle. We're going to use law of cosines. So the angle they've given us is 62. So the side across is x. So I start with that. So I say x squared is equal to my other two sides squared and added together. Minus 2 times my other two sides, and then the cosine of that angle across from the side we have here, which is 62. Okay, then on my calculator, I'm going to do that first, which is 65, minus, then I'm going to do this. 2 times 7 times 4 is 56, and then I'm going to bring down my cosine 62, and that's equal to my x squared. And again, on my calculator, I'm going to put parentheses there when I subtract, and I would get x squared is equal to 38.71, and then we're going to square root 6.2 is my answer. Okay, you can also use the law of cosines if they just give you side, side, side. So again, if you have more sides than angles, you have to use your law of cosines. Okay, so on this one, we want to find this x. So we're trying to find that angle measure. So I need to find the side across from it, which is that 1.9. So I start my law of cosines with that side squared equals, and now I'm going to do my other two sides squared and added together, minus 2 times those other two sides, and then the cosine of that angle across, which is my x. Okay? And then I'm going to do that. So I'm going to bring down my 1.9 squared, which is 3.61. And then 1.3 squared plus 2.1 squared is 6.1. Minus 2 times 1.3 times 2.1 is 5.46. And then bring down my cosine x. Okay, we're trying to solve for x. We're trying to get stuff away from x. So the first thing I'm going to do is subtract this 6.1 over. So that would give me negative 2.49 equals negative 5.46 times the cosine of x. I'm multiplying by negative 5.46. So to get rid of it, I need to divide by negative 5.46. So then those cancel out, and I'm left with the cosine of x is equal to 0. And I'm going to write this out like 4 decimal spots to make sure I get this accurate. And then remember, when you're trying to find the angle measure, you're going to do the cosine inverse of that decimal right there. And we're going to round to the nearest degree. So x would be 63 degrees. And again, make sure you are trying this stuff on your calculator. So you might want to pause as you're working on the video, check it on your calculator, and then push play, and then keep moving forward. Okay, so 4b, again, they've given us all the side measures. So to find the angle measure, this x, I need to find the side across from it, and that's how I start. So I start with 3 squared equals my other two sides squared and added together, minus 2 times those other two sides, and then the cosine of that angle across from the side we started with. And then you're going to do this stuff on your calculator. So 3 squared is 9. This would give you 57.46 minus this would give you 54.9. And then bring down that cosine x. And then you're going to solve. You're going to subtract this 57.46 over to both sides. To save on time, I'm going to just write what that is. Bring this down. Those cancel. Negative 54.9 cosine x. Then we're going to divide both sides by negative 54.9. So cosine x would equal 0. Again, I'm going to go out like 4 spots. And to find the angle measure, you got to do the inverse. So you're going to do the cosine inverse of that to the nearest degree would be 28 degrees. Okay, let's look at a word problem example of this. So this says, at 10 feet away from the base of a tree. So let's say that this is our tree here. I'll just 10 feet away from the base of our tree. The angle the top of the tree makes with the ground, so here's the ground, is 61 degrees. If a tree grows at an angle of 78 degrees with respect to the ground, how tall is the tree to the nearest foot? Okay? Now, this time, they have given us two angles and one side, right? So when you have more angles than sides, remember that's law of sines. Okay, so law of sines is you have to have the angle across from the side. That angle across from 10 we do not have, but we can find it by adding and subtracting from 180, and that would be 41. So we can set this up. So the sine of 41 over 10 would equal the sine of 61 over x, and then we're going to cross multiply. So x times the sine of 41 equals 10 times the sine of 61. And then to solve for x, we're going to divide by the sine of 41, right, on both sides. So x equals, and we're rounding to the nearest foot, 13 feet. That's how big the tree is. Remember, again, put parentheses on your calculator when you're doing that. Okay, another one similar to this. We're going to draw this picture. Drew and Hunter are playing basketball. Drew passes the ball to Hunter when he is 26 feet away from the goal. So I'm going to say, okay, here's the goal. Here's Drew. Here's Hunter. So Drew, is 26 feet from the goal, and he's 24 feet from Hunter. How far is Hunter from the goal? So that's our x. If the angle from the goal to Drew and then to Hunter, so that angle there is 34 degrees. Okay, this time you're given two sides and the angle between it. So when you have two sides and an angle, when you have more sides than angles, this is law of cosines. Okay, so I have to pay attention here because I want to find that x right there. So I need to start with that x squared. Then that's equal to my other two sides squared and added together, minus 2 times those other two sides, and then the cosine of that angle across, 34. And then you're going to just use your calculator. So x squared equals, when I do that on my calculator, I get 1252 minus, when I do that on my calculator, 1248 cosine 34. And then you're going to do that on your calculator. Remember, we want that whole quantity to be subtracted off. So put that in parentheses, and you would get 217.36, and then square root it. And so x would be 14.7. So we're going to say approximately 15 feet. If they don't specify, you can round to the nearest tenth or round to the nearest whole. Okay, last thing we're going to do is we're going to solve the triangle. So when you solve a triangle, you did this earlier. Remember, that means you're going to find all missing sides and all missing angles. Round angle measures to the nearest degree, side measures to the nearest tenth. Okay, so I'm going to start with 6A. And I'm going to draw the picture here like they have already. And this little a, little b, little c sits across from those same letter angles. Okay, so little b is 10.2. That would sit across from angle B. Little c is 9.3. That would sit across from angle C. And then the measure of angle A is 26. Okay, so on this one, they've given you have side, angle, side on this one. So if you have more sides than angles, remember that's the law of cosines. Okay, so we want to find this side here. That would be called little a. So to do that, I start with that a. A squared equals my other two sides squared and added together, minus 2 times my other two sides, and then the cosine of that angle opposite, which is 26. Okay, then you're just going to do that math on your calculator. So a squared equals 190.53 minus 189.72 cosine of 26. Again, parentheses. Then you're going to get a squared equal to 20.01. So A to the nearest tenth is 4.5. And I'm going to put that back in my picture. Okay, now I want to find an angle measure. So I have all my sides. So if I want to find an angle measure, you can either do, this time you can do law of cosines or you can do law of sines. So I'm going to actually do law of sines for this one. If we're going to find the measure of angle B. So I would do the sine of B over its opposite side, 10.2, and then the sine of 26 over its opposite side, 4.5. And the reason I'm doing law of sines is because law of sines is a lot less writing and numbers and squaring and all of that than law of cosines. But you can do either option. And then we're going to cross multiply. So 4.5 times the sine of B is equal to 10.2 times the sine of 26. Then we're going to divide by 4.5. So the sine of B would equal this. Let's see, what is that? 0.9936. And then remember, to find the angle measure, you're going to have to do the sine inverse of that. So the measure of angle B to the nearest degree would be 84. And then to find C, you can just add those angles up, subtract from 180. So the measure angle C would be 70. Okay, let's try this last one. So 6B, again, we're going to draw the picture. So A, B, C. Little a is 6.4, so that's the side across from A. Angle B is 81. Angle C is 46. Okay, so the easiest way to start this would be to find the measure of angle A. Just add them up, subtract from 180. So the measure of angle A is 53. Now, you're given more angles than sides. So more angles than sides means law of sines. Law of sines. So this would be little c. So let's find little c. So if I do, these are across from each other. Sine of 46 over little c equals the sine of 53 over 6.4. And now you can cross multiply. 6.4 times the sine of 46 equals c times the sine of 53. Divide by sine 53, both sides. Remember to put that in parentheses as your denominator. C to the nearest tenth would be 5.8. So C is 5.8. And then to find little b, again, I would do law of sines. So now 81 and b are across from each other. So sine of 81 over b would be equal to, it doesn't matter which two you use, I'm going to do sine of 53 over 6.4. And then we're going to cross multiply. 6.4 times the sine of 81 equals b times the sine of 53. Divide by sine 53 on both sides. Be sure to put that in parentheses for your denominator. When you do that, rounded to the nearest tenth, b is 7.9. Okay, so this is just the concept summary of ways to solve a triangle. So if you're in a right triangle, different things that you can use to find parts of right triangles. You can do your trigonometric ratios, so your tan, sine, cosine ratios. If it's not a right triangle, which is what we're dealing with today, you can find all of your missing parts using the law of sines or cosines. So Don't forget things you know. If it's a right triangle, you want to use Pythagorean theorem. You want to use tan, sine, cosine. If it's not a right triangle, that's when you're going to have to use law of sine and cosine. So I want to make sure you can differentiate that when you're thinking about preparing for your test. So here is your homework assignment.